In 1997, 7 cousins vanished without a trace from the Lakeshore Motel in North Carolina. Their cars remained in the parking lot. Their wallets, clothes, and personal items were untouched, but the cousins themselves were never seen alive again. They called it the Vanishing Cousins. 25 years later, fragments of the truth are beginning to surface. But what really happened that night at Lakeshore Motel? Was it family loyalty? A pact? Or something so dark no one dared speak it aloud? If you're drawn to stories of long unsolved disappearances, disturbing discoveries, and buried secrets resurfacing after decades, subscribe. The motel had been shuttered for years. Its once bright neon Lakeshore sign, now a skeleton of bent tubes and broken bulbs. Wind pushed through the cracked windows and whistled down the empty hallways where tourists once dragged beach bags and children begged for sodas from the vending machine. But on humid nights, locals swore they heard something else. Laughter, faint, echoing, impossibly young. 7 voices rising in harmony and then vanishing into the trees. The police files told a colder story. On July 6, 1997, Margaret Collins, the motel manager, arrived for her morning shift and noticed something odd. 7 sets of keys were still in the drop box, neatly stacked. Their rooms looked freshly slept in, beds unmade, luggage open, toothbrushes wet. But not one of the cousins had checked out. By noon, worried parents and siblings had called. By nightfall, the motel parking lot was filled with sheriff's deputies and search dogs, their flashlights bouncing across the tree line. The cousins' vehicles sat untouched. None had signs of forced entry. No wallets, credit cards, or IDs had been taken. And then came the silence. Weeks passed. Leads dried up. Tips turned to rumors. The sheriff's office boxed up the files and moved on. But in the quiet homes of North Carolina, the families never did. Birthdays passed uncelebrated. Chairs sat empty at Thanksgiving. And for 25 years, one question rotted in the back of everyone's mind. What happened to the 7 cousins at the Lakeshore Motel? 25 years later. The air was heavy with the smell of lake water and gasoline when Detective Sarah Monroe stepped out of her cruiser. She had been a child herself when the disappearance happened, barely 10 years old, living just 2 towns over. She still remembered the news anchors, the crying mothers, the grainy school portraits of each cousin plastered across the evening broadcast. Now she was 35, assigned to cold cases and standing in front of the rotting carcass of the Lakeshore Motel. She adjusted the strap of her leather bag and scanned the parking lot. Overgrown weeds split the cracked asphalt. The office door hung open at a crooked angle, graffitied with initials. Somewhere in the distance, a cicada buzzed, harsh and steady. The sheriff's office had reopened the case reluctantly, pressured by new evidence that had surfaced when the motel was finally sold to developers. Workmen clearing debris from room 6 had found something behind the wall, something that didn't belong there. Sarah hadn't seen it yet. The box waited inside. She drew a slow breath and walked across the lot, her boots crunching on loose gravel. Memories clung to the place. Families had gathered here once, searching, weeping. Now she felt the echo of that desperation pressing against her ribs. Inside, the motel office smelled of mildew and dust. A single light bulb swung above the front desk where a cardboard evidence box sat waiting. Sheriff Hal Brody leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his face worn from years of unfinished cases. "Thought you'd want first look," he said gruffly. Sarah set her bag down and lifted the box lid. Inside, wrapped in plastic, lay a handbag, faded purple vinyl with a broken zipper, the kind teenagers once carried to the lake. But it wasn't the bag itself that made her throat tighten. It was the dark stain across the bottom, soaked deep into the lining, still visible after decades. Blood. And tucked into the side pocket, a Polaroid. 7 cousins, sitting on the motel's dock, smiling at the camera. The timestamp burned into the bottom. July 5th, 1997, 11:37 p.m., less than 8 hours before they disappeared. Sarah's hand trembled as she slid the photo back into the bag. Where exactly was this found? Inside the drywall, Brody replied. Construction crew said it was stuffed in between studs, like someone hid it there in a hurry. DNA? Being rushed, Brody said. But if it's who we think it is, this could blow the whole thing wide open. Sarah didn't answer. She was staring at the Polaroid in her mind. The cousins' faces, their smiles, the lake behind them black as oil. They had vanished together. And now, after 25 years, a trace had clawed its way back to the surface. Sarah closed the evidence box, her jaw tightening. The past wasn't done with them. Not yet. The small-town diner off Highway 47 still smelled like fried onions and old coffee. Its blinds rattled in the weak breeze that slipped through a cracked window, and a neon "open" sign buzzed above the door. Detective Sarah Monroe sat in a corner booth with her notepad, waiting for Margaret Collins. The former motel manager had been the first witness back in 1997, the one who found the cousins' rooms empty that morning. Now, in her late 60s, she had agreed to meet Sarah only after 3 phone calls and the assurance that the new evidence wasn't a false alarm. When Margaret finally entered, her presence filled the diner with a kind of fragile defiance. Her hair was thinner, her steps slower, but her eyes, sharp, suspicious, scanned the room as if expecting ghosts. She slid into the booth across from Sarah, folding her hands. I told everything back then. I don't know what else you expect me to say. Sarah offered a small, careful smile. I just need to go over it again. Memory changes. Sometimes details surface after years. Margaret's lips pressed tight. Memory doesn't change. What I saw that morning, I'll never forget. The waitress arrived with 2 cups of coffee, black and steaming. Sarah thanked her, then turned her full attention on Margaret. Start with the morning of July 6th, Sarah said gently. Margaret's eyes unfocused, retreating into the past. I came in early. Sun wasn't fully up yet. I remember the sky was pink over the lake. I checked the key drop box, and all 7 keys were in there, lined up neat as can be. She shivered slightly. It struck me strange, because families always stagger out, 1 late, 1 early. But 7 all at once? Not likely. And when you went to the rooms? They'd been slept in, Margaret said firmly. Beds messy, showers damp, luggage open. It looked like they'd all gone down for breakfast, except they never came back. Sarah scribbled notes, though she knew the details from the files. What mattered wasn't the facts, but the way Margaret carried them, the hesitation, the shadows in her voice. Do you remember seeing anyone unusual around the motel that weekend? Sarah asked. Margaret frowned. Tourists came and went. There was a couple with a dog. 2 fishermen stayed the night. But unusual? Number nothing that screamed danger. Sarah let the silence stretch, then leaned forward. The construction crew found a bag inside the wall of room 6. Belonged to one of the cousins. It had blood on it. Margaret's face went pale. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. You mean they were hurt? Inside that room? We don't know yet, Sarah said carefully. But someone hid the bag. That means someone wanted it kept secret. Margaret blinked hard, fighting the swell of memory. They were good kids, she whispered. I used to watch them sit out on the dock at night, laughing, like the world couldn't touch them. Her voice broke, and she covered her mouth. For a moment, the diner clatter, forks on plates, a baby fussing in the corner, filled the silence between them. When Margaret finally spoke again, her voice was flat. Whatever you find, detective, it won't bring them back. But you should know. People around here don't like the past being stirred. Lakeshore's got long shadows. Sarah studied her. What do you mean? Margaret's eyes shifted to the window. where the lake shimmered in the distance. That motel. It wasn't just a business. Families fought there, lovers snuck in, drifters passed through. I heard things over the years, saw things I couldn't tell the sheriff because I had no proof. Like what? Margaret's fingers tapped the table nervously. There was talk of a man, back then. Someone who'd been watching the cousins. Came around the gas station asking questions about them, but when the police asked, nobody admitted seeing him. Too scared, maybe. Or maybe protecting someone. Did you see him yourself? Sarah pressed. Margaret hesitated, then shook her head. Only heard, but I believe he was real. A stranger doesn't just walk in and take 7 people unless the ground's already been prepared for it. Sarah wrote the words carefully. A man. Watching. Prepared ground. Before she could ask more, Margaret slid from the booth, her coffee untouched. That's all I have. Please don't call me again unless you find their bodies. And with that, she left, the diner door chiming behind her. Sarah sat for a long time staring at the untouched coffee. Her thoughts circled the Polaroid, the bag, the blood. A man watching. A community that had closed ranks. When she finally stepped outside, the afternoon sun had turned the lake to liquid silver. From where she stood, she could see the broken roofline of the motel rising above the trees. For years, the town had lived beside that silence, refusing to disturb it. But silence had a way of rotting. And sooner or later, it always broke. The Collins family photographs still lined the mantelpiece of a small brick home on Willow Drive, their frames polished, though the images inside had faded with time. Detective Sarah Monroe stood just inside the living room, her notebook open, as Patricia Pat Collins, mother of 2 of the vanished cousins, poured tea into chipped china cups. Pat's hands trembled as she set the cups down. Her eyes, though lined with age, were steady on Sarah. It's been 25 years, Detective. Every reporter who ever came through here asked the same questions. You think you're going to find something different? Sarah spoke gently. I don't know what I'll find, but I do know something was hidden in that motel wall, and it doesn't belong there. If there are things you didn't tell the sheriff back then, now is the time. Pat settled into the sofa, smoothing her skirt. A framed portrait above her showed all 7 cousins together, lined up on the motel dock in their swimsuits, arms linked. The photo had been taken the very summer they vanished. They were more than cousins, Pat said quietly. They were best friends. Every summer we brought them to the lake. They'd swim until their skin was wrinkled. They'd roast marshmallows. My sister and I thought it was the safest place in the world. Her voice broke, and she lifted the teacup as if hiding behind it. Sarah let the silence settle. It was a trick she'd learned early. Let the weight of memory fill the room, and people would speak more than they intended. Pat set the cup down and exhaled. The week before they disappeared, I noticed something. They were quieter, secrets between them. Not the usual teasing and laughter. They'd go off in little groups, whispering. My daughter Angela wrote in her diary about plans, but the diary was never found with her things. Sarah's pen froze. Plans. That's what she wrote, just one word. Plans. Pat's eyes searched Sarah's face. Do you think they left willingly? That it was some kind of pact? Sarah considered her words carefully. If it was, why hide the bag in the wall? Why leave their cars behind? Pat's lips trembled. Because maybe they didn't get to finish what they planned. A creak at the doorway interrupted them. An older man with white hair and a cane leaned heavily against the frame. His voice rasped, weathered but sharp. They didn't leave on their own. Pat's husband, Richard, entered slowly. His eyes, clouded by cataracts, still carried a piercing weight. He lowered himself into a chair across from Sarah. I told the sheriff back then, Richard said, but he wouldn't listen. There was someone watching them. A truck. Red Ford, 85 or 86, with a busted tail light. Parked across the road from the motel most nights. I saw it myself. Pat closed her eyes, shaking her head. You don't know that it was connected. It was, Richard insisted, his cane tapping the carpet. I'm not senile, Pat. I know what I saw. Always the same truck. Always the same man smoking on the hood, just watching. Sheriff said it was coincidence. I say it was hunting. Sarah leaned forward. Did you get a plate number? No, Richard admitted. But I remember the bumper sticker. Faded. Said something about honor the hunt. One of those outdoor slogans. Pat pressed her hands together tightly. Richard, stop! This won't bring them back. Richard looked at Sarah, voice low and urgent. Find that truck, detective. You find him, you'll know what happened. Sarah's heart beat faster. 2 witnesses now. Margaret, the motel manager, and Richard Collins, both describing a man watching. She glanced again at the photograph of the cousins on the mantel. 7 young faces frozen in time, laughter etched forever. Beneath that surface of joy, there had been secrets, plans, and, perhaps, someone waiting in the shadows. As Sarah left the Collins home, the evening sky was darkening, clouds bruising purple over the lake. She paused on the porch, notebook heavy in her hand, plans, a red Ford, a man watching. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, but she couldn't yet see if it was a portrait of choice or of terror. The sheriff's archives smelled of cardboard and dust. Detective Sarah Monroe spread the case files across a long oak table under fluorescent lights, the paper edges curled from years of storage. She had requested everything from the original investigation, photographs, witness statements, forensics that felt primitive now. Each folder carried the cousins' names: Angela, Daniel, Claire, Matthew, Sophie, Josh, and Leah. 7 threads tangled in one unsolved night. Sarah flipped through reports until she reached the timeline. The cousins' last confirmed movements on July 5, 1997. 8 p.m. Dinner at Lakeshore Diner. Witness. Waitress remembered them laughing, ordering too much food, leaving a generous tip. 9:15 p.m. Stopped at gas station for sodas and chips. Clerk noted rowdy but polite. 10 p.m. Returned to motel, seen carrying blankets toward the dock. 11:37 p.m. Polaroid timestamp. 7 cousins smiling at the water's edge. After midnight, no confirmed sightings. The gap stretched like a chasm. Sarah studied the Polaroid again. In the background, the motel's neon sign glowed red against the dark trees. One cousin, Daniel, sat slightly apart, his smile thinner, his eyes shadowed. Why did he look different? She turned to his file. Daniel Collins, 19th college freshman, introverted. Police had interviewed his roommate, who described him as restless that summer, like he was waiting for something. And then there was Angela's diary, missing. Sarah scribbled in her notebook. Angela, plans. Daniel, restless. Polaroid, distance. The cousins hadn't simply vanished. Something had been brewing between them. She closed the file as the sheriff entered, carrying 2 styrofoam cups. Coffee, Hal Brody grunted, setting one beside her. He lowered himself into the chair opposite. You're digging deeper than anyone's bothered in years. Sarah took a sip. Because something was missed. Look at the gaps. We know where they were until 11:37. After that, nothing. But someone saw them. They didn't just dissolve. Brody rubbed his jaw. You're thinking someone local. Knows the woods, knows the lake. And had been watching, Sarah said firmly. More than one witness saw a man in a red Ford. Taillight busted. Honor the hunt bumper sticker. Did you ever track that down? Brody's silence was answer enough. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Why not? He sighed, looking suddenly older. Because half the county drove old Fords back then. You want a list of suspects? It'd run 50 pages long. And people didn't want to talk. You push too hard in a place like this, doors slam in your face. Sarah leaned forward. They were 7 kids. They deserved more than doors slammed. For a moment, only the hum of the overhead lights filled the archive room. Then Brody spoke quietly. "There's something else you should see." He slid a smaller envelope across the table. Inside were 3 photographs never released to the public. The first, the cousins' motel room, beds unmade, blankets missing. The second, the dock, littered with soda cans and chip bags. The third, a handprint smeared on the railing, faint, but clearly in blood. Sarah's pulse quickened. "Whose?" "Tested back then," Brody said. "But DNA databases weren't what they are now. It didn't match anyone local. Didn't match the cousins either. Just there, like a ghost's signature." Sarah stared at the photo. A bloody handprint, silent witness to their last night. The cousins had been laughing, drinking sodas, taking Polaroids. Hours later, someone's blood marked the wood. She gathered the photos carefully. "Rerun this. Modern database, full analysis. That hand belongs to someone, and whoever it is, they were there." Brody nodded slowly. "You think it's connected to the bag in the wall?" "I know it is," Sarah said. Her mind flicked to the Polaroid again. The laughter, the distance in Daniel's eyes, the black water behind them. The last night wasn't just about fun on the dock. Something darker had threaded itself through their laughter, tightening until it snapped. And somewhere in the shadows, a bloody hand had reached out. The Lakeshore diner hadn't changed much in 25 years. The vinyl booths were patched with duct tape. The jukebox in the corner still ate quarters without playing, and the same brass bell jingled above the door when Detective Sarah Monroe stepped inside. The waitress behind the counter glanced up, squinting at Sarah's badge. "You hear about those kids again?" Sarah nodded. "The cousins. I am retracing their last night." The waitress, name tag reading Darlene, leaned on the counter. Her hair was pinned in a loose bun, streaked silver now. "I served 'em. July 5th, 1997. Can still see 'em crammed in that corner booth laughing like fools. They were loud but sweet. Paid in cash. Left me a $10 tip on a $20 tab. Teenagers don't do that." Sarah pulled out her notebook. "Do you remember anyone watching them? Anyone unusual in the diner?" Darlene frowned, eyes unfocusing as memory dragged her back. "Funny you ask. There was a man at the counter. Didn't order much, just coffee. Kept glancing at them. Thought maybe he was annoyed by the noise. But when they left, he left right after." Sarah's pen scratched across the page. "Can you describe him?" "Tall, thin, wore a baseball cap, gray stubble. Looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. Not from around here, I'd have remembered." "You ever tell the sheriff?" "Course I did," Darlene said defensively. "But they wrote it off. Said half the town was in here that night. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was just some traveler. But I don't forget eyes like his. He wasn't looking at them like a stranger does. He was studying them." Sarah tucked her notes away. A man studying them. A man who followed. She thanked Darlene and drove a mile down to the old gas station. The pumps had been replaced, the convenience store remodeled, but the same man owned it, Frank Delaney, now in his 70s. Frank stood behind the counter, stooped but alert. "Detective, haven't heard about that case in years." Sarah showed him the Polaroid. "Do you remember seeing them this night?" He peered at it through thick glasses. "Sure do. Came in late, all laughing, arms full of chips. I remember because they argued about who was paying. Nice kids. Did you see anyone else around them? Anyone hanging back?" Frank's brow furrowed. "Funny. There was a truck outside, red Ford, tail light busted. Parked near the pumps but didn't fuel up. Just sat there with the engine running. By the time I looked again, it was gone." Sarah's heart tightened. Margaret, Richard, now Frank. All 3 mentioned the truck. You ever see it again?" she asked. "Couple nights after," Frank said. "Same truck, parked across from the lake. I figured it was some hunter, didn't think much of it then." Sarah folded the Polaroid, slipping it back into her pocket. "That truck matters, Mr. Delaney. If you think of anything else, anything at all, call me." Back in her car, Sarah sat gripping the steering wheel. The pieces were gathering. The cousin's secret plans, Daniel's restless unease, Angela's missing diary. A man in a cap watching at the diner, a red Ford idling outside the gas station, a bloody handprint on the dock, a handbag hidden in the wall. None of it fit neatly, but the outline of a hunter stalking prey was emerging. Her phone buzzed, a text from the sheriff. "DNA results in. Call me." Sarah's throat tightened. She started the engine, gravel crunching under her tires. Whatever name came attached to that bloody handprint, it would drag the past into the light, and the silence around the 7 cousins would not hold much longer. The sheriff's office felt colder than usual when Detective Sarah Monroe stepped inside. Sheriff Hal Brody was waiting in his glass-walled office, holding a manila folder like it weighed more than stone. "Results came in this morning," he said as Sarah closed the door behind her. His voice was low, reluctant. "It's not what I expected." Sarah took the folder. Her pulse thudded as she unfolded the lab report. The words hit her like a blow. DNA from the handprint matches familial line to the Collins family. Her mouth went dry. "You're saying the blood belongs to one of the cousins?" "Not quite." Brody's jaw tightened. "It's kin, closely related, but not one of the 7. Sarah scanned the summary again. The probability of relation was nearly certain. "So who?" "A sibling, a parent." "Cousin to the cousins," Brody said grimly. "Same bloodline, which means the last night at that dock wasn't just them. Someone else in the family was there." Sarah sank into the chair across from him, her mind racing. A hidden player, a family member whose presence had never been reported, whose blood still stained the railing. "Why wouldn't the families mention that?" she whispered. "Because maybe they didn't know," Brody said. "Or maybe they did, and they buried it." Sarah remembered Patricia Collins's words about plans, Daniel's restlessness, Angela's missing diary. "Do we know which family branch?" Sarah asked. Brody slid another sheet across. "Matches strongest to Richard and Patricia Collins's line. Siblings, nieces, nephews. Take your pick." Sarah's stomach churned. Richard had spoken so fiercely about the truck, about being ignored. What hadn't he told her? "Do you believe it?" she asked softly. Brody stared past her, eyes heavy. "After 25 years, I don't believe much of anything. But blood doesn't lie." The Collins house looked smaller this time, its shutters peeling, its lawn grown wild. Patricia opened the door, weary-eyed but gracious, while Richard sat in his usual chair, cane propped against the armrest. Sarah didn't waste words. She laid the lab report on the coffee table between them. Pat's hand flew to her mouth as her eyes scanned it. Richard leaned forward, knuckles white against his cane. "What are you implying?" he demanded. "That someone related to you was at the dock that night," Sarah said carefully. "Their blood was found there. Do you know who it could have been?" Pat shook her head violently. No, the 7 were together. That was it, no one else. But Richard's face darkened. He shifted in his chair, as if weighed down by something long buried. "There was someone," he admitted finally. Pat turned on him, horrified. "Richard!" He ignored her, eyes locked on Sarah. "My brother's boy, Caleb. He wasn't part of the reunion, but he came by that summer, drifting in and out. Troubled kid, always watching the others, like he wanted to belong but didn't." Sarah's chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell the sheriff?" "Because Caleb disappeared 2 weeks later," Richard said. His voice trembled. "They found his motorcycle at a rest stop in Tennessee. No trace of him since. Sheriff said he probably ran off. I believed him, wanted to believe him, but maybe—" his voice broke. "Maybe he was there that night, And maybe he didn't run at all. Pat's face was ashen. Don't do this. Caleb was family. He was a sweet boy. Richard's eyes glistened. Sweet boys leave blood on railings? Silence fell thick in the room, broken only by the ticking of a mantel clock. Sarah's mind spun. Caleb Collins, the missing cousin. His name had never appeared in the files, a ghost relative, forgotten by the official record. But now his blood tied him to that night. Where was Caleb staying? Sarah asked. Richard swallowed. With us, for a while. Then he drifted, but that week, he was here. Pat buried her face in her hands. Don't drag him into this. The 7 were enough. Leave it alone. But Sarah knew she couldn't. The circle of vanishing cousins had just widened to 8. And if Caleb's blood was on the dock, then the last night at the Lakeshore Motel was not the story the families had told for 25 years. It was something far darker. Caleb Collins' name had been buried so deep in silence that it didn't appear in any of the sheriff's old files. Detective Sarah Monroe only found his trace in a yearbook at the county library, tucked among pages smelling of mildew and old glue. There he was, junior year, 1995. Dark hair falling into his eyes, a smirk that seemed to fight the photographer's lens. Caleb Collins. Track team. Shop club. The librarian, a woman with a hearing aid and hands like parchment, leaned over the desk. He was a wild one, that boy. Never fit in with the Collins kids, though he tried. Got into fights, always tinkering with engines. I remember him roaring around town on that old Honda motorcycle. Sarah turned the page slowly. Do you know what happened to him? The librarian shrugged. Folks said he ran off, but I always thought he was swallowed up by that lake, same as the others. Later that afternoon, Sarah sat in the sheriff's archive room again, reviewing Caleb's thin file. 2 reports, one about a fight at the high school, another about his motorcycle abandoned at a Tennessee rest stop. That was it. Nothing about the reunion. Nothing about the motel. No mention of his connection to the vanished 7. She tapped her pen against the desk. How could an entire person, a cousin, be erased from the record? She drove to a mechanic shop on the edge of town, following a lead from the librarian. The garage door was open, country music low on a dusty radio, and the air reeked of oil and gasoline. The man inside was in his 50s, bald, grease-stained, with arms as thick as tires. His name tag read, Dale. Detective, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Haven't heard Caleb's name in years. What's this about? I need to know what kind of person he was, Sarah said. Dale leaned against the workbench, thinking. Kid was restless, smart with machines, dumb with people. Worked here a summer. Could fix anything with an engine, but he had a temper. One time, a customer complained about a bill. Caleb slammed a wrench through the hood of a Buick. Sarah's stomach tightened. Violent? Dale shook his head. Not mean, just like he carried too much pressure inside. Let off steam in the wrong ways. He worshipped his uncle's truck. Red Ford, old model, bumper sticker peeling off. He'd spend hours polishing it, even when it wasn't running. Sarah's pen froze. Red Ford, broken taillight. Dale frowned. Yeah, how'd you know? The pieces clicked, sharp as glass. Caleb, the Red Ford, the watcher in the night. That evening, Sarah drove back to the motel ruins. The sky was bruised with twilight, and the lake glimmered black, swallowing the horizon. She stood on the broken dock where the Polaroid had been taken. Her thoughts tangled. Caleb had been here that night. His blood proved it. His truck matched every witness. But if he was present, why hadn't the family spoken his name? Why erase him from the narrative? A splash broke the silence. Sarah turned sharply, flashlight beam cutting across the water. Nothing but ripples. She crouched by the railing, where the old board still bore faint discoloration, the ghost of that bloody handprint. She whispered to the dark water, Caleb, what did you do? The lake, as always, gave no answer. But in Sarah's gut, a grim certainty settled. The case was no longer about 7 vanished cousins. It was about 8. And the 8th, restless, angry, tied to the red Ford, might have been the hunter. Or the hunted. The highway out of Lakeshore stretched like a scar across the land, leading south into Tennessee. Detective Sarah Monroe followed it with the case file open on the passenger seat, Caleb's thin record rattling in the breeze of the air vents. The report had been brief. July 19th, 1997. Honda motorcycle found abandoned at mile marker 142 rest stop. License plate confirmed registered to Caleb Collins. No sign of the rider. 2 weeks after the cousins vanished. Sarah arrived just before dusk. The rest stop was half forgotten. Cracked pavement, a soda machine long unplugged, graffiti scrawled across the concrete picnic tables. Truckers idled their rigs near the edge of the lot, their engines humming like distant thunder. She stood where Caleb's motorcycle had been found, picturing the scene. The machine propped neatly on its kickstand, helmet balanced on the seat, keys still in the ignition. It didn't look like a breakdown. It looked like surrender. Inside the rest stop office, a gray-haired attendant shuffled through old records. "You're lucky," he told her, adjusting his glasses. "Most of our logs from the 90s are gone, but we kept a few incident reports. Here, July 1997. Sarah scanned the faded paper. 2 truckers had reported suspicious activity the same night the motorcycle was found. A young man, matching Caleb's description, had been seen walking into the woods with another man. Her breath caught. "Another man?" The attendant shrugged. "That's what it says. Tall, older, wearing a cap. No names. Truckers didn't stick around to ask questions." Sarah's mind reeled. Caleb hadn't vanished alone. Someone had led him, or taken him, into the trees. She tracked down one of the truckers listed in the report, a retired driver named Harold Dean. He lived in a trailer outside Nashville, his walls lined with faded maps and license plates. Over black coffee, Harold squinted at the Polaroid Sarah laid on the table. The cousins on the dock. Caleb's yearbook photo beside it. "Yeah," Harold said slowly, tapping the yearbook picture. "That's the kid. Saw him sitting on the curb by his bike, smoking like he'd lost the world. Then this other fella shows up, older, thin, cap pulled low, said something to him. Kid got up, followed him into the trees. That was it." "Did the older man drive a truck?" Sarah asked. Harold rubbed his chin. "Couldn't see. Might have. There was a red Ford parked near the woods, I think, but memory's tricky after all these years." Sarah's pulse quickened. The red Ford again, always circling, always at the edge of the story. She closed her notebook carefully. "Did the kid look scared?" Harold shook his head. "Number, that's the strange part. He looked relieved." Driving back to Lakeshore that night, Sarah replayed Harold's words. Relieved. As if Caleb hadn't been dragged away but rescued. As if the man with the cap wasn't a predator but a savior. Yet Caleb's blood had been on the dock, and the 7 cousins were never seen again. The possibilities twisted darkly in Sarah's mind. Had Caleb betrayed the 7, leading them to the hunter? Or had Caleb himself been a victim, caught in the same trap? And the man in the cap, was he a stranger? Or someone closer? As the lake came into view, its surface black under the moonlight, Sarah felt the weight of it pressing against her chest. The truth wasn't just buried in the motel walls or sunk beneath the water. It was moving, across states, across years, always circling back to the same shadow. The red Ford. The man who watched. And now, Caleb. The 8th cousin. Detective Sarah Monroe returned to Lakeshore with the Tennessee report burning in her bag like a live ember. Caleb walking into the woods with another man. A red Ford parked nearby. The older man's presence threading through every witness memory like a shadow. She pinned the Polaroids and reports to the motel office wall, the corkboard filling with lines of string connecting names, times, sightings. The cousins' faces smiled forever from their last doc photo, while Caleb's yearbook smirk hung beside them, a ghost never officially counted. The hunter's silhouette loomed in every gap. 2 days later, she knocked on the door of Margaret Halbrook, aunt to 3 of the missing cousins. Margaret was pale and tired but sharp-eyed, her hands clutching a rosary that clicked softly as she spoke. "Detective, you keep circling back," she said, voice weary. "What else could there be after all this time?" Sarah laid out the Tennessee report on the coffee table. "This man. Witnesses saw him with Caleb the night his bike was abandoned. Cap pulled low, thin-billed, gray stubble. Did that description match anyone the cousins knew?" Margaret's rosary stilled. Her lips parted, then pressed tight again. "What is it?" Sarah pressed. Margaret looked away, her voice barely audible. "That sounds like my brother." Sarah froze. "Your brother?" "Elliot," Margaret whispered. "He was troubled, always drifting, never married. Sometimes he'd show up at reunions, sometimes not. He wore that same damned baseball cap, even indoors." Sarah's pulse pounded. "Why didn't anyone mention him in the original investigation?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Because we thought he'd already gone. He'd left town that summer, at least that's what we told ourselves." "Or what someone told you," Sarah said softly. Margaret's silence was answer enough. Back at the sheriff's office, Sarah dug into old employment and arrest records. Elliot Barrett, drifter, odd jobs, minor bar fights. Never charged with anything serious. But in one traffic citation photo, taken in 1996, there it was. A red Ford. Taillight cracked. Sarah stared at the printout until her throat went dry. Elliot Barrett, uncle to the missing cousins, the man in the cap. She shoved the photo across Brody's desk. It was him. All along, he was there. Brody rubbed his temples. "We questioned the families 25 years ago. Not one mentioned a brother named Elliot." "They protected him," Sarah said, "or they feared him." That night, Sarah returned to the lake. She walked the broken dock under a sky littered with stars, the water black and silent around her. She whispered the names one by one: Angela, Daniel, Claire, Matthew, Sophie, Josh, Leah, and then softly, Caleb. 7 cousins, plus 1. All tangled with a man in a cap who should have been family, not predator. Her flashlight beam caught on something beneath the railing, metal glinting. She crouched, pried with her penknife, and pulled free a rusted bottle opener wedged between the boards. Faded letters were still visible. E. Barrett. Her hand trembled around the relic. Elliot had been here, watching them, bleeding into the wood, leaving behind his name like a whisper. And if Elliot was the hunter, then the family's silence was not ignorance. It was complicity. Rain drummed against the Collins porch roof as Detective Sarah Monroe stood at the door, soaked and relentless. Richard Collins opened slowly, cane in hand, suspicion etched in his eyes. "You again?" he muttered. "Yes," Sarah said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The living room smelled of dust and lemon cleaner. Patricia sat on the sofa, her rosary tight in her hands, eyes darting nervously. Sarah laid the photo on the coffee table. Elliot Barrett's cracked taillight Ford stared back from the paper, frozen in time. Richard's face went pale. Patricia's rosary fell silent. "Why?" Sarah demanded. "Did neither of you ever mention Elliot? He was your brother. The cousin's uncle. Witnesses saw him at the diner, the gas station, the Tennessee rest stop. His blood was on the dock. He was here. With them." Patricia shook her head violently. "You don't know what you're saying." "Don't I?" Sarah's voice sharpened. "I've got a bloody handprint tied to your bloodline, a bottle opener with his name wedged in the dock, and every witness in town remembers a man in a cap. That was him. Elliot Barrett didn't vanish into thin air. He's at the center of this. Richard lowered himself into his chair slowly, shoulders sagging. We swore. Swore what? Sarah pressed. Patricia's hands trembled as she covered her face. We swore not to speak his name again. Not after that summer. It was the only way to keep the family intact. Sarah leaned closer, her voice quiet but deadly. 7 children disappeared. 1 more. Caleb. Vanished in Tennessee. You kept silent because of family pride, because you didn't want to admit your brother was circling them like a wolf? Richard's knuckles whitened on his cane. His voice cracked like brittle wood. We didn't know what he'd done, only that he was there, always hovering, always watching. He made people uneasy. But blood is blood, detective. You don't drag your own through the mud unless you have proof. And no one had proof. Until now, Sarah said. She left the Collins house with the storm pounding harder, the air thick with rot and secrets. In the motel ruins that night, she set her flashlight on the counter of the gutted office. She pinned Elliot's photo beside the cousin's smiling Polaroid. 2 images, one of laughter, one of silence. She stared at Elliot's shadowed face until her stomach turned. The hunter wasn't a stranger at all. He was family, an uncle, the one they were supposed to trust. But why? Why stalk his own blood? Why trail them across states? Why leave a bloody handprint, then vanish himself? Sarah closed her eyes, the rain hammering against the roof. The silence of the Collins family was no longer just cowardice. It was guilt. And guilt always meant there was more to the story. Detective Sarah Monroe stood in the basement of the sheriff's office, dust motes swirling in the pale light. Hal Brody had reluctantly given her a cardboard box labeled Barrett, Elliot, 1989. Found it in evidence storage, he said. Never logged into the cousin's case because it came years before. He was arrested once. Disorderly conduct, psychiatric hold. Didn't think it mattered back then. Sarah pulled out a stack of spiral notebooks, the covers stained with oil and mildew. She flipped one open. The handwriting was jagged, uneven. They laugh at me. They don't know I see more than they do. The water talks if you listen long enough. It keeps secrets for those who are worthy. Another page. The kids think I don't belong, but I was here first. I'll show them the lake remembers me. Her skin prickled. Elliot hadn't just been troubled. He had been obsessed with the lake, with belonging, with the cousins who seemed to shine where he did not. She brought the journals to Dr. Karen Hughes, a retired psychiatrist who had once consulted for the county. The woman's office smelled faintly of chamomile tea and antiseptic. Dr. Hughes adjusted her glasses as she read. Classic paranoid ideation, obsessive thought loops, fixation on symbols, water, family, recognition. This is someone on the edge of psychosis. Sarah leaned forward. Could he have harmed them? Dr. Hughes's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, but equally possible. He believed he was protecting them. In delusion, those two often blur. Protection becomes possession. Possession becomes destruction. Sarah thought of the Polaroid. 7 cousins smiling, unaware of the man in the shadows who believed the lake itself whispered to him. That evening she returned to Margaret Holbrook's home. Margaret's eyes widened when Sarah placed the journals on the kitchen table. Where did you get those? Margaret whispered. Storage, Sarah said. Why didn't the family ever turn these over? Margaret's face crumpled. Because we burned the others. Elliot's writings frightened us. He talked about binding people to the lake, about cleansing sins in the water. We thought if we destroyed them, maybe the darkness would go too. Sarah's voice sharpened. You destroyed evidence. Margaret looked away. We destroyed a curse. Back in her motel room, Sarah spread the journals across the bed. One entry caught her breath. They don't invite me, but I'll go anyway. Caleb understands. He wants in. He'll help me. They'll see I belong with them, even if it takes the lake to prove it. Sarah stared at the words until her vision blurred. Caleb. The eighth cousin. Not just a victim. Not just a witness, a partner. The red Ford. The handprint. The bloodline. It hadn't been Elliot alone. It had been Elliot and Caleb together. And maybe that was why the family had stayed silent. Because betrayal ran not from an uncle, but from within their own generation. The lake was still the night Detective Sarah Monroe returned, as if waiting. Moonlight silvered the broken dock, the reeds swaying in the faintest wind. She carried Elliot's journals under one arm, their pages swollen with damp, the words of a man whose mind had fused with water and memory. Sheriff Brody trailed behind her, his flashlight beam cutting a pale path. "You sure about this?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "The answers are here. They always were." At the end of the dock, she spread the journals on the boards. The words leapt up in the beamlight. "The lake will take what the world does not want. Caleb sees. Caleb believes. We'll bring them where they can't laugh anymore, where they'll never leave us." Brody swore softly. "He wrote it plain." Sarah's chest tightened. "Not plain enough. There's still a question. Did Caleb help willingly, or was he pulled under, same as the others?" The water lapped softly against the wood, as if mocking her uncertainty. A figure appeared at the tree line. For a split second, Sarah's breath hitched. The silhouette of a man, thin, cap pulled low. Her hand went to her holster. "Who's there?" The figure stepped forward. An old man, stooped but unmistakable. Richard Collins. He raised a hand, trembling. "Stop. Put that away. I came because I can't carry it anymore." Sarah kept her stance firm. "What can't you carry?" Richard's face was a ruin of grief. "The truth. Elliot wasn't the only one. Caleb followed him, worshipped him. The boy wanted belonging. Elliot gave him poison instead. Together they led the others here that night. I knew, I suspected, but admitting it meant admitting one of ours had betrayed the rest. So I kept my silence." Brody's jaw tightened. "And now?" Richard pointed at the water. His voice cracked. "Because the lake remembers. It doesn't hide forever." The sheriff's dive team had been reluctant, but under Sarah's command they went into the black depths. Hours passed. The sun rose pale and weak over the trees. And then, at last, the lake gave something back. A rusted chain, human bone, tangled in silt. The remnants of 7 children, bound and sunken. And among them, a smaller skeleton, marked by healed fractures that matched Caleb's medical records. Sarah stared at the evidence bags, her throat raw. Caleb had not walked away with Elliot. He had sunk beside the others. The betrayal had been real. But so had the punishment. By dusk, she stood again at the dock, the wind cold on her face. Brody lit a cigarette and shook his head. So Elliot did it, and dragged Caleb into hell with him. Sarah's eyes fixed on the water. Or Caleb followed willingly. The lake doesn't say which, it only remembers what it was given. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Sarah whispered the cousins' names, one by one. Angela, Daniel, Claire, Matthew, Sophie, Josh, Leah. And at the end, Caleb. 8 voices swallowed by water, 8 lives bound by silence. The families had tried to bury it, but blood, memory, and water always rise. And the lake never forgets. The camera would have opened on the lake. Early morning. Mist rising like breath from its surface. Birds skimming the water, unaware of what lay beneath. Detective Sarah Monroe sat on the same dock where the cousins had smiled in that Polaroid 25 years ago. She looked older now, her face lined by long nights and hard truths. The Collins case was never about 7 missing kids, she said quietly, as though to an unseen interviewer. It was about 8. 8 cousins, 8 lives, and 1 uncle who believed the water belonged to him. The police divers had recovered enough remains to confirm identities. 7 cousins laid to rest at last. Caleb, too, his bones tangled among theirs, stripped of answers. The families held a service with 8 headstones, the cemetery ground heavy with rain. Some wept, others stood rigid, as though grief was too sharp to touch. But Elliot Barrett's body was never found. The journals ended abruptly, no entry after the week of the disappearance. He had vanished into the same silence he had worshipped, a shadow the water never spat back. Sarah looked over the still surface, her eyes reflecting the same questions she had asked since the beginning. Did Caleb betray them? She whispered. Or did Elliot drag him into madness? Did he walk into the water willingly, or was he chained like the others? The evidence says both stories could be true. But the dead don't get to testify. Only the living carry the weight. She closed the journal in her lap, the last page stiff with lake water stains. The case was marked closed in official files. But in the town of Lakeshore, doors still closed when Elliot's name was spoken. Families still prayed the water would keep its remaining secrets. And strangers driving past the motel ruins still swore they saw a man in a cap watching from the tree line, his outline sharp against the mist. Sarah rose, brushing the dust from her coat. She turned her back on the lake, though she knew it would follow her, in dreams, in shadows, in the silence before sleep. Because the truth was simple and terrible. The lake does not forgive. The lake remembers. And so do the ones who remain.